Hey, Katie. We have The Message in the Hollow Oak. We are on Chapter 12, Rewarding Search. As the 8 friends stood listening, the cry was repeated. "That sounds as if it came from up there somewhere," said Nancy. She pointed to the top of the bluff above the cave. The group hurried up a series of stone steps at one side of the huge opening to the cliff top. Nobody was around. The searchers fanned out and looked in the surrounding woods, but found no one, and finally met again at the foot of the steps. "Somebody else may have discovered the person who needed help," Nancy suggested. Ned looked at her searchingly. "Do you suppose the cry was made to get us up to the bluff and keep us away from cave and rock until someone who didn't want to be seen got out of there?" Nancy agreed this was possible. "But how could anyone know we were coming?" she asked. Just then they saw a boy of 14 racing across the top of the cliff and yelling. Apparently he was shouting to a friend. "There's the answer," Nancy commented, then added, "Let's have a look at the cave now." Following her and Ned, they all climbed up to the wide clearing in front of the huge cave mouth. "I can see why this was a great place for pirates," Dave declared. "It's halfway between the bluff top and the river. With a lookout up on the cliff, no one could take them by surprise." When the young people entered the shadowy cavern, their voices resonated strangely. They walked up the gradually sloping floor to the rear. "I've read about this place," said Julie Ann. "Prehistoric Indians used it too, and in 1831 the cave was the hideout for a gang of counterfeiters." Bess shivered. "And now maybe Nancy's enemies are staying in it." "They couldn't have been here long," Ned remarked. "After all, this is a public park and people come and go." "We seem to be the only ones around here right now," said George. "Let's look out for the treasure," Nancy urged, "and keep our eyes open for any clues to Kit Cadle or anything pertaining to the Hollow Oak." Nancy and Ned took out flashlights, and the intensive hunt began. There was no hidden treasure in sight. I have a hunch we're wasting our time following up the legend Lightfoot told me," Nancy said. "Maybe river pirates did rob Pierre Francois, but it seems unlikely that any would have been around here in his day. I recall now that the only travelers were the Indians and a few explorers and trappers." Ned agreed. "It was more than 100 years later that lots of pioneers headed westward. Many floated down the Ohio on flatboats with all their possessions. That was when piracy flourished." "Lightfoot," Nancy remarked, "probably confused Pierre Francois' story with some other legend." Nevertheless, she beamed her light over the walls once more. Seconds later, she caught sight of something just out of reach. It was a piece of paper sticking out slightly from a crevice between rocks. She called to 6-foot Ned to pull it out. "But be careful," she said. "It looks fragile." Ned reached up, and little by little he pried out a folded sheet of paper, which he handed to Nancy. "This sure is dirty and ready to fall apart," he said. It was evident the paper had been subjected to dampness and dirt, and there were holes in it here and there. Nancy unfolded it gingerly and played her flashlight on the faint writing. The smudgy message was hard to read, and part was missing, but the young detective's heart leaped excitedly when she saw the signature. "It is A.C.E., she exclaimed. "I'm sure this was written by A.C.E. Armstrong, Boise Osborne's friend." Ned asked. "What does the note say?" Nancy read it aloud. "Prisoner of Kit took me to cell in ill town." There's a bunch of spaces in there. By this time, all the others in the cave had gathered around Nancy and asked if she could decipher the meaning. She studied the paper for a few moments, then replied, "I believe the whole message is, 'Prisoner of Kit Cadle, taking me to cellar in Elizabethtown.'" "You're a wonder!" Art exclaimed, and immediately came close to Nancy. She smiled, but made no comment. Instead, she said enthusiastically, Now I have a real clue for Boise. The whole group went outside and sat down to discuss the message. Julie Ann asked, "How are we going to get to Elizabethtown?" "Our towboat passed that town about 7 miles back," Ned spoke up. "We probably have to leave the Sally O." "We'd better hustle the boat or it'll leave without us," Bert remarked. "Oh, I'm sure Captain Borge wouldn't abandon us," said Bess. "That's true," Nancy agreed, "but it's not fair to keep him waiting." She tucked the precious note into a pocket and hurried with her friends to the quarry dock. As soon as Nancy was on board, she and Ned reported their discovery to Captain Borge. "We should go to Elizabethtown, so I'm afraid we must end our trip now," she said. "That won't be necessary," the captain replied with a wry smile. "We've developed engine trouble and are going to be here quite a while, I'm afraid. You can have the rest of the afternoon for your search, but be back by 6 o'clock. I'm hoping to be able to take off then." "How will we get to Elizabethtown?" Ned asked. Maybe somebody from the quarry will be driving there," he said. "I'll see." Stepping out of the pilot house and onto the landing of an iron stairway, the captain called down to a man on the dock. After a short conversation, Borge came back inside. "All set," he said. "You can go in with that fellow in about 10 minutes, if you don't mind riding in a pickup truck." "That's okay with us," said Nancy. "Is there anything we can do for you while we're there?" "You could pick up several chocolate bars in the general store," the captain said. "The crew likes them." Nancy and Ned hurried off to tell their friends about the trip. Quarter of an hour later, the young people were seated in the back of the green pickup truck, bouncing along a narrow road toward Elizabethtown. When they reached the main street of the small town, the driver let them out. "Where's the police station?" Nancy asked. The man chuckled. "We don't need one. There's only one policeman. He's the marshal, but he's away on vacation. Go up this side street," he said, pointing to a tree-shaded lane. "To the 3rd house. That's where Ben Wooster lives. He's the marshal's deputy right now." The young people thanked the driver, and he went off. It was agreed that Nancy and Ned would talk to the deputy while the others did the shopping and went sightseeing around the tiny town. A short distance away, they could see a small, attractive park overlooking the riverfront. "We'll meet there at 5 o'clock, Ned told them. He and Nancy hurried off to the deputy's house. A thin, red-haired young man was seated on the porch steps eating an apple. "Are you Deputy Wooster?" Nancy asked. "I am," he answered solemnly. "What's the trouble?" He pointed to the steps. "Take a seat." The couple did, and after introducing themselves, quickly explained about the kidnapped detective. Nancy showed Mr. Wooster the note she had found in the cave. "Well now, the marshal told me about this Kit Cadle and the 2 fellows he probably kidnapped," said the officer. "But this is the first lead we've had to them. Trouble is," he added thoughtfully, "this is a mighty small town, only 500 folks or so, and I know just about all of them. I can't think anybody who would have a man hidden in a cellar or anywhere else for that matter." "Is there an empty house around?" Nancy asked. The young man raised his sparse eyebrows. "Now there you might have a squirrel in a tree, young lady. The old Hatchet house has been empty for almost 5 years. "'Tain't empty now," said a raspy voice. Nancy turned to see a skinny blonde youth in dungarees pants coming up the walk. "This is my cousin Jimmy," said the deputy. "He lives next door and he don't miss much." "I think somebody's living in the Hatchet place," the newcomer went on. "Hank and me were out that way in our car a couple of nights ago and saw lights in the house and the car in the driveway." Deputy Wooster stood up. "I'd better look into this," he said firmly. He reached into a trouser pocket, took out a badge, and pinned it to his blue shirt. "Is there trouble?" Jimmy asked, his blue eyes sparkling. "Can I go with you, Ben?" "Okay," said the deputy. "I guess we could use an extra man, but it might be dangerous. You do only what I tell you." He turned to Nancy and Ned. "Do you folks have lunch?" "A little," Nancy replied. "Jimmy," said the deputy, "go into the kitchen and fetch some apples and that bag of doughnuts on the table. I'll start the car." A few minutes later, Nancy and Ned were riding in the back seat of the police car. The deputy drove down a dirt road outside of town. Jimmy shared the apples and doughnuts with them as they told him about the note. After several turns, Wooster headed along a rutted lane and pulled off into a small clearing. "We'll walk from here," he said quietly. Single file, the four made their way up the road, keeping inside the tree line. At the edge of the driveway, they stopped. "Wow!" Ned exclaimed. "What a wreck!" Before them was a large gray frame house with broken shutters and a tumble-down porch. "No car in the driveway now," Nancy noted. "I can't believe anyone is living in this place." The four circled the old dwelling, but saw no signs of life. Then they walked carefully onto the sagging porch. The front door was standing ajar. Quietly, they entered. "Let's try the cellar," Nancy urged. She took out her flashlight, and the deputy turned on his. "It's that door at the end of the hall," whispered Jimmy. "I explored this place a couple of years ago." As noiselessly as possible, they went down the dark stairway. Except for a huge furnace and some odds and ends of junk, the cellar was empty. "Where were the lights you saw?" Nancy asked Jimmy. "Upstairs." Carefully, the group searched the first floor, then climbed to the second. While Wooster and his cousin were examining the bedrooms, Nancy and Ned spotted a door which they suspected might lead to a third-floor attic. Ned opened it, and the two listened. There was a stairway indeed, but everything above was dark. Nancy and Ned started up the steps. Suddenly, they stopped. From somewhere ahead of them came the sound of heavy breathing. "Ooh, sounds like there may be someone upstairs."